Today we're going to be going over the Module 10 test review. Our first question says, what would the graph of f of x be if f of x equals g of x minus 3? So I'm looking at this 3. This is my transformation. Now, this is my original parent function, and these are my options. We want to know what movement does this negative 3 mean? Well, I know if it's on the inside of the parentheses, I know that's a horizontal movement. Now, I want to know, how did this minus 3 affect our parent function? Remember, our parent function is always f of x equals x squared. That's the original. And this is what's going to be happening to the x squared. So on the inside, I know it's horizontal. That means it can either be left, right, compression, or stretch. Oh, I don't know how to spell stretch. Stretch. All right, so because there is no multiplication happening with the x, I know it's not going to be one of these two. I know it's going to be left or right. And horizontal is always opposite. So if I'm going negative, we would think we're going to the negative side, which is to the left, but we're actually going to the positive, so we're going to the right. So this is a transformation right 3. So I'm going to look at which graph went to the right 3. Well, it started from 0, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. My vertex should be at positive 3. Well, this vertex at negative 3. This one went down 3. That's not what I'm looking for. This one went to the right 3. So that's the one that I'm going to be looking for. Right 3. Now, if I look at my other options, this one went to the left, 1, 2, 3. So this is left 3, not what I'm looking for. And this one went up 1, 2, 3. Also not what I'm looking for. All right, number 2. Number 2 says classify the following functions. Well, I know I have 3 types of functions that we learned about this year. We have linear, which we should know is y equals mx plus b. We have exponential that we learned in x, which is y equals a times b to the x power. And finally, we have our most recent quadratic, which can be seen as 2 ways, with the most common ax squared plus bx plus c, or this is standard form or vertex form, y equals ax minus h squared plus k. So these are our 3 options. Now, our first one, well, it doesn't have any exponents, so I know, well, exponential has an exponent, quadratic has an exponent, so I know this is linear. It doesn't have any exponents, and this is our, if we put a 1 here, now it looks like y equals mx plus b. So I know that's linear. Now my second one has an exponent of 2. Well, I already know it's not linear because we used linear, and the only one with an exponent of 2 is going to be a quadratic. And finally, since I'm done with linear and exponential, I know this is going to be, or linear and quadratic, I know this is going to be exponential. But in case you didn't know, if it has a power to an x, that means that is exponential. All right, and that's all for number 2. Go to number 3. So for number 3, I want to solve for x. I want to get my solutions. Now remember, our solutions are our x-intercepts. So I want to know, where does this equation, if I were to graph it, where does it touch the x-axis? It's going to have 2 x-axes, hopefully. So we're going to take a look. So in this case, you can use quadratic formula. We don't have a b, so your b would be 0. This would be a, 0 would be b, and this would be your c. I think that's going to be longer, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to get x by itself. So I'm going to put x in a box. I know I'm not going to touch x. I'm going to move everything else to the other side. So I'm going to do plus 72. I move something using opposite operation. 72's are gone. I'm left with 2x squared equals 72. I'm going to get rid of this 2 by dividing by 2. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we can cancel that out. I'm left with x squared. 72 divided by 2 is going to be 36. And now, the opposite of an exponent is a root. So I'm going to take the square root of 36. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. And that's going to cancel out that little 2 and the radical. So I'm just going to be left with x equals and the square root of 36. Now the square root of 36 is going to give me 2 answers. It's going to give me plus or minus 6. That means my first answer is going to be positive 6 and my second answer is going to be negative 6. Do not forget that anytime you take a square root, you have to put a plus or minus. That means you're going to have a positive and a negative answer. If you just put the positive answer, it's going to be incorrect. You have to have two. All right, number 4. So for number 4, it wants to know which of the following represents the function, and here is our function. So before we look at the function, let's think of the format that this is. This is vertex form. So if we remember, vertex form is ax minus h squared plus k. We also remember how to find vertex. Our vertex was our hk. We always know that vertex is hk. So let's start by just identifying the vertex here. Our vertex is -2, 3. But remember, if it's on the inside, it's always the opposite. Horizontals are opposite. So when I pull that -2 out, it's going to be a +2, and this 3 stays the same. So +2, +3. So now, even though my graphs look different, they all look like they're in different spots, they all look different shapes, I'm just going to focus on the vertex. Which one has the same vertex that I'm looking for? All right, let's start over here. 2, 3. That means I'm going to go x2, y3. To the right 2, up 3. Well, I'm going to go 1, 2, 1. Well, that graph is clearly not it. Let's see, over 1, 2, up 1, 2, 3. That's not my vertex. Remember that this is the vertex. That means the highest or lowest point. That is not even on my graph, so I'm not looking at that. Let's try the next one. Over 1, 2, up 1, 2, 3. Also not my vertex. And finally, 1, 2, over 1, 2, 3. And there is my vertex. So I'm looking at A. Okay, number 5. Right, it wants to find the zeros. Remember, zeros is another word for x-intercepts. So all we're looking for is to solve for x. They did the first step for you. This is already factored, so I don't have to worry about doing anything else. Do not do the rainbow method. This is not going to you're going to go backwards. This is the format that I wanted, and this is why we factored, to get it in 2 parentheses. That way I can make it equal to 0 using the 0 property. So I'm going to set each one equal to 0, and I'm going to solve for x. In this case, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. It's going to cancel out that 1. Remember, you move something to the other side by doing opposite operation. And to get rid of this 6, I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. That's going to leave me with x equals 1 over 6. That is my first answer. It is okay to get fractions. Do not turn it into a decimal. On the other side, I'm going to add 3, because the opposite of -3 is +3. My 3's cancel out because -3 plus 3 is 0. X equals 3. And there is my second answer. And that's it. All right, number 6. So this one has multiple ways you can solve it. First, I always want to make sure it's equal to 0. I cannot do anything until it is equal to 0. So I'm going to start by adding 4 to both sides. That's going to leave me with x squared minus 10x plus 24 equals 0. So now I can do one of 3 things. I can use quadratic formula. That is my -b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. B, I can just regular factor. Because my leading coefficient is 1, I can factor normal. Or, if you like AC method, you can also use AC method. So, any one of these 3. I am going to go with factoring because I think that's going to be the easiest one. And I'll also do quadratic formula. That way you can see both. So I'm going to start by finding the multiples of 24. I know 6 and 4. I know -6 and -4. I know 1 and 24. I know 2 and 12. But since I already know which set when added together gets me -10, I'm just going to stop there. I know that -6 minus 4 is -10. And I know -6 times -4 is +24. So I know this is the set that I'm going to be looking for. I can put it directly in my parentheses. The x squared gets shared, 1 in each parentheses. I'm going to put the -4 in the first one, and the -6 in the first one, -4 in the second one. Once it's factored, I can set it equal to 0 using the 0 property, and just solve for x. Now, I know how to get x by itself. I know by using opposite operations, so I'm going to plus 6 on both sides. I'm left with x equals 6. There's my first answer, and plus 4 on both sides. I'm left with x equals 4. And that is my second answer. Now, I can also use the quadratic formula. And I'm going to show you how to do that down here. And you should get the same exact answers. All right, so I am going to start by labeling A, B, and C. I'm going to start by labeling my A, B, and C. I know A is going to be 1, B -10, and C +24. A is going to be 1, B -10, and C positive 24. And now I'm just going to plug it into my formula. So I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of negative 10 squared minus 4 times A is 1 times C is 24 all over 2 times 1. And we're going to start by doing what we know. I know a negative and a negative create a positive, so that's going to be positive 10 plus or minus. I know negative 10 squared is going to be positive 100 because anything to the second power is positive, because a negative times a negative is a positive. Now I'm going to do negative 4 times 1 times 24 times 24. That's going to give me 96, and it's going to be negative 96. As a negative times a positive is a negative, negative times a positive is a negative, all over 2. Because 2 times 1 is 2. Now I know 100 minus 96 is 4, so I'm left with 10 plus or minus the square root of 4 all over 2. And I know the square root of 4 is 2, so I have 10 plus or minus 2 all over 2. Now it's when it turns into my two separate problems. I have 10 plus 2 over 2 and 10 minus 2 over 2. 10 plus 2 is 12, divided by 2 gives me 6. 10 minus, that should be a 2. 10 minus 2 is 8, divided by 2 gives me 4. And we get the same exact answers. Doesn't matter which way you do it. All right, number 7. Number 7 says, a ball is shot from a cannon into the air with an upward velocity of 30 feet per second. The equation that gives the height of the ball at any time, t, is h equals negative 16t squared plus 30t plus 2.5. How many seconds will it take the ball to hit the ground after being shot out of a cannon? Round your answer to the nearest tenth of a second. All right, so I'm going to start by, I know the height. The height, if we're looking for the ball when it hits the ground, I know the height of the ball is going to be 0 feet. So I know this is already going to be equal to 0. I know I'm looking for the time it takes to hit the ground. So if I'm solving for t, I'm solving for x. They're just replacing the x with a t. So I know I'm looking for the x-intercept. So I'm not going to use AC method. I'm going to use quadratic formula because I have decimals in here, and no way I'm going to find the numbers that multiply that when added together. So I'm just going to use quadratic formula. I'm going to label A, B, and C. A, B, C. A is my negative 16. B is my 30. And C is my 2.5. And it is clear that we will be getting decimals here, so if you get decimals, do not let it scare you. All right, so I'm just going to plug it into the formula. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you do not have to have this memorized. Your reference sheet will have the quadratic formula. All right, so negative 30 plus or minus 30 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 2.5 all over 2 times negative 16. Okay, we're going to need our calculator for this one. All right, so let's start with 30 squared, which is the same as 30 times 30. That's going to give us 900. So I'm going to start by slowly replacing the things that I know how to do. Got 900. All right, I'm going to do negative 4 times negative 16 times 2.5. Negative 4 times, let's clear that. Negative 4 times negative 16 equals 64 times 2.5 equals positive 160. So I'm going to write plus 160. And 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. All right, now I know how to do 90 plus 160. That's going to be 1,060. 1,060 over negative 32. Now I'm going to do the square root of 1,016. And that's where we're going to get the decimal. So I'm going to do 1,060 square root it. Okay, we're going to get 32.557. Okay, so this is going to turn into negative 30 plus or minus. We got 32.557. 32.557 all over negative 32. And now it's going to turn into our two problems. Negative 30 plus 32.557 over negative 32. and negative 30 minus 32.557 over negative 32. And let's see what we get. So for my first answer, I'm going to do negative 30 plus 32.557 divided by 32 negative equals, so I get negative 0.079. So negative 0.079 as my first answer. We can round that one to the nearest 10, so that would be the first decimal place. So my first answer is negative 0.01. Oh, negative 0.1. Now I'm going to try my second one. I get negative, let's clear that, 30 negative minus 32.557 negative equals, oh, mistake there, 30 negative minus 32.557 equals, divided by 32 negative gives me 1.95. When we round that to the nearest 10th, we're going to get 2. And 2.0. So now we're looking at, we've got two answers, we've only got space for one. Well, now let's look at what we're talking about. We're talking about time, and time can only be measured in positives. So I know that negative answer is gone. So when rounded, my ball takes 2 seconds to hit the ground. All right, next one. All right, we want to find the correct A value. Okay, so you're given the vertex form. This is what I'm missing. So I need to solve for A. So I'm going to start plugging things in. I know f of x is another name for y, so I know that's y. Let's start by finding my vertex. My vertex is either my highest point or my lowest point. So that's what I'm looking for. Now, how can you tell? Well, I know that my vertex is right next to 2 points that will be exactly the same. The two y's will be the same. So I know that this y and this y are the same. This y and this y are the same. So that's my two tails. I'm looking for that lowest point. So I'm looking at 2, or highest point. I'm looking at 2, 4. That's my vertex. That's my HK. 2, 4. So I'm going to start plugging into my vertex form. I don't know my y, don't know my a, don't know my x, but I know my h. My h, when put in the inside, is going to be the opposite. I know it's minus 2. And I know my k is plus 4. All right, now, do I know x and y? I have a bunch of x's and y's. I'm gonna choose 0, 12. Because 0, 12, I think 0 is always an easy number to work with. So I'm gonna go with 0, 12. So anywhere I see x and y, I'm gonna replace it. X is 0 and y is 12. Now, I only have one variable left. That means I can solve for that variable. I'm going to start by following PEMDAS. 0 minus 2, start with parentheses, is negative 2. I'm going to bring everything else down. I know negative 2 squared is 4, so now I have 4a plus 4 equals 12. I can get rid of this 4, minus 4 on both sides. I'm left with 8 equals 4a, divide by 4, a equals 2. So my A is going to be 2. All right, number 9. A tennis ball is thrown off the roof of a building and its height h of t in feet after t seconds can be found using the equation. And there's the equation. Complete the following statement correctly, identifying the vertex and interpret it within the context of the problem. The vertex is, well, we know how to find vertex using vertex form. We know hk. This is my h. This is my k. I know h is always the opposite, so it's going to be 3, 21. Let's see where that matches. 3, 21. All right, we've got D. Okay, the vertex is, which shows that the maximum of, now I want to know what's going to be the highest point. What's going to be the height? So I'm looking for, how am I going to know which one of these numbers is the height? Well, I know inside here, t, that's what's in place of the x. So I know the x is going to be my time. And my x in this case, remember hk is also still a point, x comma y. So I know my h is going to be 3, or my x is going to be 3. My h, it's still my h, is going to be my time. So that means this 21 is what it's going to be equal to. That's the y. That's going to be my height. There we go. So it's going to reach a maximum of 3 feet after 21 seconds. And that's it. All right, and then finally, which the graph below represents a quadratic function. What function is graph? So let's remember our parent function is always where it bounces off that 0. Always where it bounces off 0. So I want to know from the original what happened. Well, we moved up 1, 2. So my directions were to go up 2. I know that's a vertical transformation, so I know that's going to be on the outside of the parentheses. Good thing is we have nothing here on the inside of the parentheses. So I can start by eliminating a, because a is our parent function. Remember, our parent function is always x squared. So a is not going to be it. X squared is what I just graphed here. Let's look at b. I know this negative is attached to the x. That's a reflection. This graph is not upside down. So I know it is not going to be b. Now I'm looking at c and d. Well, I know up is towards the positive, so I know I'm going to be going up to positive 2. And there's my answer. And that is all for our Module 10 test review.